Discovering the Scriptures. James chapter 5, verse 9. Reading from the King James Bible. Quote, "Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door." Unquote. Reading from the English Standard Version. Quote, "Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door." Unquote. Young's Literal Translation. Quote, "Murmur not against one another, brethren, that ye may not be condemned. Lo, the judge before the door hath stood." Unquote. Reading from the Amplified Bible. Quote, "Do not complain against one another, believers, so that you will not be judged for it. Look, the judge is standing right at the door." Unquote. Now let's go ahead and parse this out in the Greek. Grudge. Now let's parse this and let's take a look at it, how it's written. It's written in the present tense, so it's talking about now. It is in the active voice, which represents you as the subject, is the doer, the performer of the action. And it's written in the imperative mood, which is comparative to the English, which means it commands the hearer to perform a certain action by the order and authority of the one commanding it. So it's talking about now, it's talking about you, and it's talking about a command. Grudge not. Continuing, one against another. So that means don't compare. You against a brother or a sister. Brethren, lest ye be condemned. Now I looked that phrase up, ye be condemned. It's only used one time in the Greek New Testament, and it's used here. Let's parse that out. Ye be condemned is written in the aorist tense, so that is characterized by an emphasis on the action, not in the time of past, present, or future. It's in the passive voice, which represents the subject is being the recipient of the action. So this is happening to you. The subjunctive mood, which is the possibility of the potentiality that the action may occur or may not. So ye be condemned. Continuing. Behold the judge. Now, this word for the judge in the New Testament occurs several times. And each time it is talking about somebody who's actually a person like our judges in our system making judgment calls. Continuing. Standeth. Let's parse that out. That's written in the imperfect tense. So that means represents a continual or repeated action. It's written in the active voice, so it's talking about you as the performer of the action. And it's indicative mood, which means that it is stating a fact. Continuing, before the door. Now this ends the Greek parsing of Matthew chapter 5, verse 9. John Gill's commentary of the Bible, James chapter 5, verse 9. Quote, "Grudge not one against another, brethren." Unquote. On account of any happiness, temporal or spiritual, which another enjoys, do not inwardly repine at it, or secretly sigh and groan in an envious manner at it, though nothing may be said, as the word used signifies, much less complain of, accuse, and condemn one another, or meditate and seek revenge. Quote, "Lest ye be condemned." Unquote. Hereafter, at the bar of Christ, by the judge of the whole world, who is privy to the secret murmurings and grumblings, and the envious sighs and groans of men. See Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. Reading from the King James Bible, quote, "Judge not, that ye be not judged." Unquote. Continuing, quote, "Behold, the judge standeth before the door." Unquote. There is another that judges, who is the Lord, and he is at hand. He is just at the door. A little while, and he will come, and not tarry. which may refer not to Christ's coming to destroy Jerusalem, but to his second coming to judgment, which will be quickly. For the gospel times are the last times. There will be no other age at the end of this. Christ's will come. This ends John Gill's commentary on James chapter 5, verse 9. Now, looking at Matthew Henry's complete commentary, looking at James chapter 5, verse 9, this needs to be looked into context because this applies to verse 7 and 8 before it. And let's take a look at this briefly. Attend to your duty. Verse 7, be patient. Verse 8, establish your hearts. Verse 9, grudge not one against another, brethren. Consider well the meaning of these three expressions. Be patient, bear your afflictions without murmurings, your injuries without revenge, and though God should not in any signal way a manner appear to you immediately, wait for him. The vision is for an appointed time. At the end it will speak and will not lie. Therefore, wait for it. It is but a little while, and he that shall come will come, and will not tarry. Let your patience be likened out to long suffering. So the word here is used, and signifies it. When we have done our work, we have need of patience to stay to our reward. This Christian patience is not a mere yielding to necessity, as the moral patience taught by some philosophers was, but it is a humble acquisition in the wisdom and will of God, with an eye to a future glorious recompense. Be patient to the coming of the Lord. And because this is a lesson Christians must learn, though ever so hard or difficult to thee, it is to repeat it in verse 8. Be also you patient. So be you also patient. 2. Establish your hearts. Let your faith be firm, without wavering. Your patience of what is good, constant and continued, without tiring. And your resolutions for God and heaven fixed, in spite of all the sufferings and temptations. The prosperity of the wicked and the affliction of the righteous have in all ages been a very great trial to the faith of the people of God. David tells us that his feet were almost gone when he saw the prosperity of the wicked. Psalms 73, verse 2 and 3, reading from the King James Bible, quote, But as for me, my feet were almost gone, my steps had well nigh slipped. For I was envious at the foolish, when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. Unquote. Some of those Christians to whom St. James wrote might probably be in the same tottering condition, and therefore they are called upon to establish their hearts. Faith and patience will establish the heart. Number 3. Grudge not one against another. The words here are signified. Grow not one against another. That is, do not make one another uneasy by your murmuring groans at what befalls you, nor by your distressful groans as to what may further come upon you, nor by your revengeful groans against the instruments of your suffering, nor by your envious groans at those who may be free from your calamities. Do not make yourselves uneasy, and make one another uneasy by thus groaning to and grieving one another. The apostle seemeth to me, saith Dr. Manton, to be here taxing those mutual injuries and animosities wherewith the Christians at those times have banded under the name of circumcision and uncircumcision, did grieve one another, and give each other cause to groan, so that they did not only sigh under the oppressions of the rich persecutors, but under the injuries which they sustained from many of the brethren who, together with them, did profess the holy faith. Those who are in the midst of common enemies, and in any sufferings circumstances. should be more especially careful not to grieve nor to groan against one another. Otherwise judgments will come upon them as well as others, and the more such grudgings prevail, the nearer do they show judgment to be. Consider what encouragement here is for Christians to be patient, to establish their hearts, and not to grudge one against another. And, number 1, look to the example of the husband, who he waits for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it, until he receives the early and latter rain. When you sow your corn in the ground, you wait many months for the former and latter rain, and are willing to stay till harvest for the fruit of your labor. And shall not this teach you to bear a few storms and be patient for a season, when you are looking for a kingdom and everlasting happiness? Consider him that waits for a crop of corn, and will not you wait for the crown of glory? If you should be called to wait a little while, then the husbandman does. It is not something proportionately greater and infinitely more worth your waiting for. But, number 2, think how short your waiting time may possibly be. The coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Verse 8. Behold, the judge standeth at the door. Verse 9. Do not be impatient. Do not quarrel with one another. The great judge, who will set all to rights, who will punish the wicked and reward the good, is at hand. He should be conceived by you to stand as near as one who is just knocking at the door. The coming of the Lord to punish the wicked Jews, as then very nigh, when James wrote this epistle, and whenever the patience and other graces of the people are tried in an extraordinary manner, the certainty of Christ's coming as judge and the nearness of it should establish their hearts. The judge is now a great deal nearer in his coming to judge the world than when this epistle was written, nearer by above 2,000 years, and therefore this should have the greater effect for us. Number 3, the danger of our being condemned when the judge appears should excite us to mind our duty as before laid down. Grudge not, lest you be condemned. Fretfulness and discontent exposes us to the just judgment of God, and we bring more calamities upon ourselves by our murmuring, distrustful, envious groanings, and grudges against one another than we are aware of. If we avoid these evils and be patient under our trials, God will not condemn us. Let us encourage ourselves with this. Number 4, we are encouraged to be patient by the example of the prophets in verse 10. Take the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord for an example of suffering, afflictions, and of patience. Observe here the prophets on whom God, by the greatest honor, and of whom he had the greatest favor, were most afflicted. And when we think that the best men have had the hardest usage in this world, we should hereby be reconciled to affliction. Observe further, those who were the greatest examples of suffering affliction were also the greatest and best examples of patience. Tribulation worketh patience. Hereupon James gives it to us as the common sense of the faithful. Verse 11. We count those happy who endure. We look upon righteous and patient sufferers as the happiest people. See chapter 1, verse 2 through 12. Number 5. Job also is proposed as an example for the encouragement of the afflicted. You have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, etc. Verse 11. In the case of Job, you have an intense of a variety of miseries, and of such as were very grievous. But under all he could bless God, and as to the general bent of his spirit, he was patient and humble. And what came to him in the end? Why, truly, God accompanied, established, and brought about those things for him, which plainly prove that the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. The best way to bear afflictions is to look to the end of them, and the pity of God is such that he will not delay the bringing of them to an end when his purposes are once answered. And the tender mercy of God is such that he will make his people an abundant amends for all the sufferings and afflictions. His bowels are moved for them while suffering. His bounty is manifested afterwards. Let us serve our God and endure our trials, as those who believe the end will crown all.